Welcome, councillors. We've just got a problem with the internet, but we're recording, and then as soon as we possibly can, when the internet's back up and working, we'll get back on to there. So welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for October 2021. The meeting is open to the public and is not being live streamed. I would like to thank those of you in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone watching via council social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Portfolio Leader, Councillor Carl, Councillors, Chief Executive Officer and General Manager of Planning and Development Group. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarawar peoples, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. We don't have any apologies today, but we do have one leave of absence which requires noting. Councillor Carol Taylor is not here today, and there's no known declarations. So we move to item number 3, which is a request for discounted infrastructure charges with the temporary economic development incentive for district townships policy for the aged care facility at Wheel Street at Pittsworth. And Kate Rosier, our senior infrastructure planner, is going to take us through it. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Council has received a request for a discounted infrastructure charge for an essential service. It relates to a development permit issued to an extension for a residential care facility at 12 Wheel Street in Pittsworth, Borraba Living. To encourage economic development in townships, the Temporary Economic Development Incentives for District Townships policy stipulates that Council may, under certain circumstances, accept a reduced adopted infrastructure charge. The approved development satisfies the requirements of this policy, whereby charges can be discounted. The discount is at the discretion of Council. This discretion has been used previously to afford a 100% discount for similar development in township areas. Infrastructure charges from the previous approval for an extension at Borraba Living attracted a full waiver by resolution of Council on the 21st of October 2014.
Sorry to interrupt. Madam Chair, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking actually that I might have to declare a conflict here, because in my role as a board member at Clifton Community Health Services, there might be enough of an overlap in the area that the same clientele and the same patients who might come to Clifton might also actually be going to the Pittsworth facility.
Would you like to test that with your fellow councillors?
I think so, Madam Chair, please.
Okay. So Councillor Von Hoff is a director on the Clifton Hospital Health and Hospital Services Board and is wondering whether she may have a conflict of interest. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Von Hoff?
Just a question through you, Madam Chair, through to Councillor Von Hoff. Councillor Von Hoff, as your role of director, and it's a not-for-profit organisation as well, do you see your involvement in any way influencing your decision that you might make today in this item?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Carl?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Councillor Rebecca, is the Clifton, what is it, the Clifton
Community Health Services.
Community Health Services, are they an eligible recipient of the same discounts that we're discussing here?
I don't know.
They would be, and they have been recipients in the past.
Okay.
They're actually listed in the report.
I haven't seen that, sorry.
Oh,
Okay. Mr Mayor?
Madam Chair, I don't have an issue at all. I think that probably the fact that Councillor Von Hoff is part of the Clifton arrangements out there, I think that probably adds to the knowledge that she'd bring to the table. I can't see where she could possibly have a problem, and I'm quite happy to move that she remain in the room for the discussion.
Do I need a seconder, Councillor Summerfield? So will Councillor Von Hoff remain in the room as we vote on that? She can? Okay. Yes.
Just
Councillor Carl, you had a question?
one more question, if I may, Madam Chair, and it's probably through to the General Manager. Is this infrastructure discount, is it a contestable round, or is it just on an as an approach made to council.
No, not contestable. It's an approach made directly to council under the policy in each individual case.
No
They're
worries.
quite separate.
No, thank you.
So the Mayor has moved and Councillor Summerfield has seconded for Councillor Von Hoff to be allowed to stay in the room and participate in the vote.
Madam Chair, just actually for my comfort, I might remove myself from the discussions. I appreciate the councillors' move there, but it's an evolving space, I suppose, and I just don't want to get into a situation now or sometime in the next 6, 12, 18, 2 years. So I might exclude myself from this. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Von Hoff. Okay, thank you. Keep going.
So just to restate, infrastructure charges from the previous approval for the extension to Burrabil Living attracted a full waiver by resolution of council on the 21st of October 2014. The applicant is a registered public benevolent institution and eligible to apply under policy 2.81, deferral of infrastructure charges for not-for-profit organisations and community uses. However, the applicant has applied under this policy, likely to secure a full waiver instead of the deferral of charges. Thank you.
Is there any questions for the officer? Thank you. Councillor McDonald?
Put that on, eh? Thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Kate. Kate, in previous iterations of this, the deferral of infrastructure charges has been in full for not-for-profit organisations and would revert to being a charge if that then that change to a for-profit entity was in place. So can you just explain the difference now? You just mentioned that from a deferral, in the case of they would have a deferred charge if the change of use went to a commercial or for-profit entity, to a full waiver?
Through you, Chair. This is an application for an essential service in a township area under the Temporary Economic Development Incentives for District Townships policies. So when the deferral of infrastructure charges comes into play is under a separate policy for the deferral of infrastructure charges under not-for-profit organisations and community uses. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm comfortable with that
Happy with
answer.
that,
Thanks,
yep.
Madam Chair. Kate, could you just shift your microphone up just a fraction? Thank you.
It's not
That's
very
great.
sensitive, that one, sorry. Any other questions for Kate? No? Okay, so the recommendation is there before you that we approve the request for a full waiver of infrastructure charges reflected in the infrastructure notice. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Melissa Taylor, Mr Mayor, all those in favour? Councillors, before we finish on that item, Dave, I might just get you to come and speak to this because we've had a lot of these come to council and they've always been recommended with 100% deferral. So I might just get you to Dave to...
Madam Chair, we've voted.
Oh, yeah, beg your pardon. Yes, thank you, Councillor Carr. Yep. Did we voted? All those in favour, yeah?
We voted,
Sure, I
so
did,
we
yeah.
just need to record
carried.
because we had a councillor out of the room. That's all.
Sorry.
We just need to record.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, you can see that there's a regular pattern of decision-making here in relation to essential services. Officers are always looking to refine our processes so they can be more efficient. It does draw on our resources, community resources, to bring decisions to council. It was probably well thought of to have that at the discretion of council, where we come along each time to talk to council. Given that there's been a consistent level of decision-making in this regard, officers at the next opportunity would like to review the policy. There are a few tweaks we'd like to put in there. Councillor McDonald pointed out one particular different feature in the policy to the one that we do for not-for-profits, and we would like to refine that and perhaps seek, if council would like to make a consistent decision in relation to the 100% waiver, put that in the policy and therefore reduce the amount of time we have to take up at council meetings.
So, Dave, are you proposing just coming back with a
not looking for a decision.
Session
Certainly, Madam
so
Chair,
we
not
can
looking
have
for a decision now, but to get a feel from council if they would like us to do that.
So, apart from the delegated, if you like, the other parts of the policy that need reviewing still need to come back anyway, don't they?
We do. We come back on a regular basis with these policies. This is I think the only part of a policy I can think of where there is this discretion as to a percentage of a waiver, discount or deferral on the basis of council. Given that council's been routinely doing this at 100%, I think it would be efficient for officers to come back and council to consider a change to the policy that if you like, enables under delegation officers to apply percentages, discounts, waivers, etc., as we do under the rest of that policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify that would be for not-for-profits only, given that this council has previously, to my biggest disappointment, waived $1 million in infrastructure charges for the Bupa development, which I still struggle with, that decision. I just want to make sure that it's quite clear that it's not-for-profits only that we're considering making the amendment for.
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly we have got what we call the not-for-profits policy, which was done for public benevolent institutions, health promotion charities and community uses. That policy would remain. We see that working quite effectively. This one's a little bit different. It does, in townships, enable essential services to gain a consideration of those infrastructure charges, whether they be a PBI or not. Certainly that's something that council would wish to consider. As part of the routine process, we could bring it back for consideration at that time. Not looking for a decision now, but rather as part of the routine review of policies, we were thinking of bringing that back.
Something to think about. Councillor Carr?
Certainly,
Okay, well,
Madam Chair, from that I would take that officers need to put a fair degree of work into that, and that would not be simply routine.
when's the policy due for renewal, Dave? Or are you thinking about bringing it forward for...
We were thinking about bringing it forward. There's a number of other policies that relate to this issue, and certainly a review of the infrastructure charges resolution to adopt the new prescribed charges that the state has released. So we were thinking of bringing that back as a package to council prior to Christmas.
Okay.
But it sounds like there is some work to do and some consideration that council would like to apply to that. So we will bring that back at the appropriate time.
We'll leave that in your hands. Okay, thanks, Dave.
Thank you,
Thank you
Madam
for
Chair.
the suggestion. All right, so we move to item number 4, which is the Toowoomba Region 21-22 Register of Fees and Charges introduction of a pre-lodgement meeting fee. And Matthew Coleman, our Principal Planner, is going to take us through that. Thank you, Matthew.
Morning, councillors. I'm here to discuss the proposal to introduce pre-lodgement fees for the Toowoomba Region 2021-22 Register of Fees and Charges. The background is that the Development Services branch provides pre-lodgement meeting service to discuss development proposals prior to formal lodgement of development applications with the council presently. At present, there is no fee attached to that. It's a free meeting between prospective applicants and council's technical officers with minutes of the meeting issued. It enables a discussion about technical aspects of a development proposal following preliminary assessment of submitted plans and documents detailing the proposal. Pre-lodgement meetings are required under council's policy to be held within 10 business days unless being requested to be deferred by the applicant based on their requirements. Pre-lodgement meetings form part of a spectrum of communication that council carries out with its applicants and customers. The formal minutes are at the high resource end of the development customer communications though. Other forms of development customer engagement range from counter discussions, telephone conversations, email exchanges, formal correspondence and informal meetings. Over time, in 2019, the Development Services Branch sought industrial member feedback and prepared a report. Part of that was a determination to examine different options for the provision of pre-lodgement advice, ranging from formal pre-lodgements or more informal options and fees versus non-fee options, and documentation to the industry. Following on from that, there was an internal audit report that was also undertaken looking at development application processes in 2020. This identified concerns regarding the resource requirements and the effectiveness of the outcomes from the current pre-lodgement service. The internal audit found of 635 pre-lodgement meeting requests between October 2017 and June 2020, only 216 subsequent applications were made, and this appeared to be declining year on year from the data that they looked at. A further review of the pre-lodgement data between 2015-16 and 2020-21, hard to say, revealed that on average we receive about 203 requests per annum. Of those, approximately 50 requests were withdrawn or cancelled, and from that there was approximately 52% of the 153 meetings held that resulted in application subsequently. So as noted, there were many options, or several options that are going to be looked at with regards to improving the pre-lodgement process. One of them was eligibility to lodge a request. After examining different options for the provision of pre-lodgements services, it was determined that a pre-lodgement meeting fee and specific eligibility criteria for the conduct of a pre-lodgement meeting would assist in ensuring that only relevant requests are eligible for the full pre-lodgement service. There are also other mechanisms which we seek development advice and that are available that are not subject to paying a fee. The eligibility criteria, which is yet to be finalised, but generally would include some of the following triggers: looking at the scale of the development, that is, how big it is, how many lots are generated, application types, more complex ones such as preliminary approvals or impact assessable, land use types, things like shopping centres, locations, specific locations that we have an interest in the detail of, like priority development areas or emerging community zones, and also specific issues that might be of importance to discuss prior to formal lodgement, things such as vegetation, flooding and the like. Now, it should be noted that with the application of eligibility criteria being provided, even if the application were not meeting those criteria and they're therefore valid to have a formal application, that isn't the end of communication. There would be those other informal processes that we go through, whether it's an email, phone call or informal meeting, less resource intensive activities to discuss with those applicants. So it wouldn't be a matter of you don't meet the criteria, tough luck on your horse. It'll be more, there are other avenues that would be discussed. And senior planners would have discretion over whether a non-compliant request still warranted a pre-lodgement meeting even if they didn't meet the formal process. There's more work to be done on that, but that is part of this whole package that we're talking about. With regards to the meeting fee, after examining different options for the provision of pre-lodgement advice, it was determined that a pre-lodgement meeting fee, which may be credited against a future related development application, will assist in ensuring the best utilisation of council officer resources. One of the concerns we have had for a while is that potentially some customers are utilising the pre-lodgement process to try and circumvent the current fee requirement for written advice, formal written advice. So we offer a free service. Instead of requiring written advice, you use the free service to try and circumvent that. We also looked at other local authorities and what practices they may have. There are only two from the half a dozen or so that I looked at that actually had some sort of fee attached to them. Brisbane City Council, which had several fees. They had $488 for a mini pre-lodgement, which is supposedly supposed to precede a full pre-lodgement, or you could get a pre-lodgement package service, which would require multiple meetings and advice. That would be $2,684. Or a standard 1 hour pre-lodgement meeting, which would be $976. Also, Mackay had that you could have one free application and then you had to pay for the subsequent one. There has been some consultation undertaken already with the development industry discussing the eligibility and the fee component, and they were undertaken in June. We discussed with some of our leading consultants in the region, Precinct Urban Planning, Property Projects, Alpha Planning Applications and BCert, who are 4 of our highest users of the current service, the idea of having the fee and also the eligibility criteria. The proposal to introduce a fee and application criteria was discussed. The majority accepted the introduction of the fee. They were reasonably comfortable with the outlook on that. The fee that we're proposing at the moment is a fee of $550, which, if there were no subsequent follow-up application, would really be just a partial fee of what it actually costs to do the work, but provides, I guess, an intent that people are willing to proceed and do it, because we are talking about crediting against a subsequent application. So the idea would be that you would credit the fee against a related application that's lodged within 12 months of the meeting. And I'll just note on page 5, paragraph 3, there's a typo that says 18 months, but it is 12 months, and that's what's in the amendment that's shown. The fee would also, and this is because we do genuinely believe if these meetings are done properly and people engage with them openly and willingly, a chance to improve development outcomes in longer term. The fee would include 2 meetings with minutes carried out within 9 months of the initial pre-lodgement request. So if you come to us, you have that discussion, you get that feedback, and you go away and do some work on it, and you want to come back and have further discussions, the options there under that same fee. So I guess what we're trying to say is that what Brisbane City Council is charging $2,684 for, we would be charging $550, and then potentially crediting that against a subsequent application that follows up from that. From a timing perspective, we're looking to commence this on the 31st of January 2022. This will allow us to prepare the procedures and documentation and get all those sort of things in order for new processes and the fee, and also to provide a chance to notify and communicate with our customers about the changes as well. So it's with that in mind that I bring forward a recommendation to Council to reintroduce a pre-lodgement meeting fee for the Toowoomba Region 2021-22 Register of Fees and Charges for the Planning and Development Group Miscellaneous Application Request number 11 pre-lodgement meeting, and the changes to the fee request take effect on the 31st of January, and the fee be that $550.
Thank you much, Matthew. Any questions? Councillor Carl and Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, Matt, a couple of questions come to mind. I'll use the term mum and dad developer, but that's not indicative of their capacity to deliver a project or their expertise in other areas other than planning and development. But I put them in that analogy of an inexperienced developer. Are we confident, my first question is, are we confident with the other forms of communication that we will capture enough of those opportunities and people to be able to interface with council at the front end as part of a communication cycle in the whole planning and development process? And the reason behind that question is when there's confusion in the communication process and we miss opportunities on the front end, it can often result in litigation. And then what cost do you put on litigation for a lost opportunity on the front end for open dialogue and a clear understanding? So are we confident that we will still capture enough of these opportunities that won't go pear-shaped down the track? Remember, I said mum and dad in the context of a novice developer, but capacity to pay, capacity of expertise in other areas to deliver a project, very oftentimes quite capable.
With regards to less sophisticated developers, there is the same opportunities. If they're coming to us with a complex application, they'd meet those eligibility criteria because it's based around the complexity involved. Again, the fee would be credited against subsequent application. So if you proceed through from that, then that would be credited against it. The other forms of communication we have are generally documented as well, and they're there for those discussions to be had. There's no doubt about that. There can be informal meetings as well, but you just don't have the minuted approach to it, and that's where both parties would take their own notes and keep track of what their understanding from the meeting was. There is, again, an ability to escalate your inquiries. Often we have with regards to particularly more unsophisticated developers or experienced ones, they'll come through the front counter or through just a general email from the webpage, and then depending on the nature and circumstances of the inquiry, they'll be escalated to the appropriate level to give them advice.
Thanks, Matt. I'll just ask my question quickly. Sorry, Councillor McMahon. So who's triaging these people to say whether they get the pre-lodgement or they get the phone call or they get the...
Well, there'll be the initial triage of the criteria. That was one of the things the audit said that they were seeking was a bit more structure around it, because at the moment it's basically wide open. There's no real sort of criteria. And then it's triaged by people looking at it going, well, this is fairly basic. I can deal with this in just a phone call.
So these are the technical advice officers, is that?
No, mostly planning officers are doing that at the moment. That's why when I talked about the figures, I talked about we'd receive about 203 on average per annum, and about 50 of those would either be withdrawn or cancelled. They are more often than not basic inquiries that are put in written form as pre-lodgement requests that can be dealt with through either an email or a phone call or an informal discussion with the client. They generally at the moment are triaged in a conversation between the planner and their senior, or they may even come and talk to me about that, or their other principal about whether it warrants that meeting. What this will do is put a little bit more structure around that. That's not related to the fee. We're really just talking about the fee in this, but I'm talking about the eligibility criteria. Will show a little bit more sort of structure around it. What we're thinking about for that at the moment is actually having those triggers and criteria, give them a weighting, and then say once you get to a certain value, then it tips over into something, yes, we definitely would have a pre-lodgement for it. We will also have a wild card in there where people will say, I don't meet the criteria, but I think it deserves a meeting because of X, Y and Z. There may be a bit of development that over time too, as we see what sort of things come in and see where there might be some, the holes in the logic that we do or whatever, but we'll try to do that up front. We've given some of those preliminary criteria to those consultants that we're talking about, and they, the look at the eligibility criteria was probably a bit more mixed. The fee was probably more well accepted. The criteria was a little bit more mixed, I think, from the discussions we had with them.
Great, thanks. Councillor McMahon?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A few questions, if I may, through you to Matt. And my first question is very much in line with Councillor Carl's. If I had a new developer who was maybe limited by experience and not necessarily capacity, and I wasn't familiar with our systems and our processes, I suppose the comment that we get from the community regularly is that, planning and development is a slow, clunky and often costly process. As we know, much of that legislated and necessary given, but if I was wanting to do it, I'd want to make sure I did it right to save extra delays, extra costs maybe down the track. And so I worry that by the pre-lodgement meeting may be a necessary service, and by charging for that, we may be just making more work for the developers and ourselves down the road, and that they may be missing out on something that's very much necessary, especially for a newer or inexperienced property developer. Can you just comment on that?
Well, I think that's where we talk about the crediting part of it is a genuine part of it, because what it's doing is basically trying to, weed out where there might be vexatious as opposed to those that are generally seeking to progress. So if you pay the application fee, you had the pre-lodgement, as I said, 2 of those for the price of 1. And then if you lodge that application or a related application within 12 months of that, that is credited against your application fee. So it is, we're not going to add an extra fee to the process if it genuinely progresses, but that's what came out of that audit. Their concern was that there might be a lot of tyre kicking without a great deal of follow-through in some instances, and this just adds a little bit of skin in the game to make sure that people follow through on those sort of things. As far as someone who might be less experienced but yet fully committed to doing something, that shouldn't be necessarily seen as an impediment to what they're doing, I would have thought.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I didn't read the credited on a future meeting when I was reading this earlier. I think that's a valid point, but certainly my reading of this, and perhaps the message that the public may pick up, is things like, it disadvantages mum and dad developers, or, in law we talk about justice for the rich, and we don't want that, but maybe in planning it's, people who have the money get the results thereafter. And so I thank you for clarifying that. My only other question is, the recommendation talks about reintroducing the third word. Did we used to have this?
Well, it's actually in there but doesn't have a fee attached to it. It just says
Okay.
free at the moment.
Thanks for clarifying that. Appreciate
I was
it.
going to ask the same question. Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor O'Shea, then Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Question through you to, I assume, would be Matthew. I'm curious around, we spoke about we consulted the industry and the majority accepted the introduction. Just curious, that majority, what reasons were they in favour, and that minority, what was the general...
The general gist of the conversation was that they didn't see it as a significant impediment to people wanting to genuinely go ahead and have a pre-lodgement meeting. Some of them did see that there might be some people that balk at it. There might be some consultants and customers that might be a little bit more reliant on council's advice than others, that see it as potentially a speed bump on the road to development. But generally, it was seen as a reasonable fee, and particularly with the crediting component as part of it, they thought it was a reasonable outcome.
Okay, if I can
Yes,
follow up. Thanks, Madam Chair. And as well, I'm curious around resources with this. So understanding the pressures we have on council, but understanding the importance of this particular service. Resource-wise, I mean, does this potentially add more work? I know it's in a there's more of a process put in place, but I guess I'm curious around the amount of resources it takes to ensure that this is a service that is of the standard that delivers adequately for the community.
I would suggest that, yes, there will be some at the margin, some extra things that will have to be done per request that comes in. But I would suggest, and we'll assess this as we go along too, to see what the numbers are doing and how it's going. But on the margins, the ones that do come in, I think it will, but then it'll possibly reduce some of the work that we do on ones that we're cancelling and kicking out of the system already anyway. They'll have the conversations, and those ones that we cancel and kick out of the system, we have conversations on them already. But you've got admin that are dealing with stuff that comes in, and then at the end of it, nothing comes out of it. This one will add a little bit of more administrative sort of work around it, but will probably mean that we can allocate resources, those more expensive resources of the planners, more efficiently in the longer term.
Okay, and finally, Madam Chair, if I may just, I guess because the thing that comes back to me, I understand the process and what we're trying to achieve with this, but my question around it is, what I question, I suppose, is this a service that we deliver that it's a service to the community, or is it like it's a business in terms of a cost recovery? So, and I just query, are we better off looking at how we better service this, whether it's through resources as opposed to adding a fee? So, is it a service, or is it a business transaction from council's point of view?
Well, I guess what you're talking about there is probably more a policy issue that council can deliberate than I. But at the end of the day, what you're saying is correct. At the end of the day, we only have a finite amount of resources and time to apply to the spectrum of things that we as planners do. Yeah. And this one does consume a fairly healthy amount of time. It's not our major thing, but it's one of those jobs that's very time. We want it quick, we want it now, and you've got to drop a lot of things to do it. If we were to maintain it in the longer term as a free service, maybe it is something council would have to think about with regards to providing adequate services to do it, along with the other jobs we have to do. But this is seen as a means of dealing within our current resource allocation to deal with it and still provide the advice to the community, but adequately target that advice based on the type of development that that needs the more complex written sort of advice as opposed to that needs maybe an email or just a conversation or an informal meeting.
Thank you.
Good question, Councillor O'Shea, but I mean, it's interesting that this has come out of the internal audit report where, you know, they're saying that the resource requirements and effectiveness of the outcomes aren't stacking up. So I guess, you know, in the interests of always looking at our efficiencies, I would suggest it's probably not good at the moment with this.
But how, if I may, so how does adding a fee improve the efficiency of the outcome? It's the same resources, we're doing the same job, we're adding an extra layer, but we're just going to charge people for it.
I guess what we're doing is that the more, sorry, through you, Councillor, we're the more complex things that need the more detailed written advice and the formal meeting process and those sort of resources will get what they need to do that. The other stuff will be directed towards the appropriate level for those inquiries and what they need at that stage, I guess is the best way of putting it. The other part is we're still crediting the 550, so there's still a significant community benefit part of this where we're not trying to how would you say, seek to make money out of it, and it's probably more to make sure that we're not getting tyre kickers that aren't necessarily going to follow through on things.
Happy with that, Councillor O'Shea. Councillor Shine?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Matt. I'm just wondering a couple of questions. Where else does this pre-lodgement service apply in Queensland?
Pre-lodgements are fairly ubiquitous. When I was doing this, I had a look at places like Western Downs, Southern Downs, Ipswich, Mackay, Townsville, Lockyer Valley, Brisbane City, Cairns Regional, Logan City were the ones that we looked at that might be analogous of Toowoomba. And they provide those. Generally, information we got from them is fairly basic sort of thing. As I said, there were only two places that sort of talked about charging, and that was Brisbane City, just straight up charges, but has that scaling effect. And Mackay gives you, like my father would say, you get one chance, and then they charge you after that.
Right. So apart from those two, everywhere else that you mentioned, there are quite a number of them.
And they talk about their spectrum of consultation. I'd say that they kick a lot of formal ones out and do a lot of informal. It varies from council to council.
Right. I must say that it appears to me that it's a really sensible policy that was brought in. How long ago was it, you know, the history of it as far as Toowoomba is concerned, roughly?
Pre-lodgements, how long have we been doing those?
Councillors, I've been with council, it'll be 14 years next January, and we've offered a pre-lodgement service in all of that time. I've been a planner for, 20-something years, and every council that I've worked in, I worked at the former Hervey Bay City Council, Caloundra City Council, Maroochy Shire Council, all offered a pre-lodgement service, and at least certainly in southeast Queensland, if not the entire of Queensland, I'd say just about every reasonably sized council would offer a pre-lodgement service, particularly in the planning arena. We are constantly communicating with our peers in the industry, and particularly the other local governments. We're a member of the SEQ DA Managers Group, and so we discuss best practice. We look at what other councils are doing. We share ideas. We share business improvements and efficiencies that we're undertaking. And I'd say that, as I said, probably just about every other reasonably sized local government in Queensland offers the service. The issue would be in terms of the criteria around it. And as Matt's indicated, the issue has become that it does take a significant proportion of officer time to run a pre-lodgement, and to be frank, you really don't need a formal minuted pre-lodgement. For example, a boundary realignment inquiry or potentially a 1-into-2 reconfiguration of lot proposal. They can be dealt with through more informal discussion processes. So the intent is certainly that we will continue to ensure that officers at the appropriate levels continue to be available and still do engage with our industry members and community members who are less sophisticated in the development arena. But in terms of the formal pre-lodgement processes, it does absorb, it's not only planner time, it can be engineering, not only our own development engineers, but other areas of council, parks, waste, just about every area of council that might contribute to a proposal. So it is a significant commitment of time. All are required to submit written information, so it is quite a resource-intensive process to undertake a pre-lodgement. So I guess the recommendation is that we only offer that service where we really feel that it's warranted to invest that resource time. As Matt said, the fee of $500, give or take, certainly doesn't reflect any degree of cost recovery. It is merely to, I guess, as Matt said, look at those that are serious about progressing a proposal through the system. And as Matt indicated, one of the other issues that we've encountered is just about anyone resorting to a pre-lodgement because it's a free service when it doesn't necessarily need to go through that process. So setting the criteria, setting a fee that's then rebatable against a future application, we see as a useful tool to focus our resources where we need and to still offer a service but in a different way where that whole formalised minuted process really isn't warranted based on the, I guess, complexity of the inquiry.
Thank you for that answer. But in summary, though, apart from 2 councils, all of the others that were mentioned previously and from your experience still don't charge. It just seems to me that, you know, the subdivision type or the big commercial venture, etc., the $550 probably won't make much difference really, but it's something. But for the mum and dad ones that Councillor Bill referred to, it just seems to me that it's in council's interest to sort the wheat from the chaff at an early stage and encourage people to, you know, rather than go through a formal thing that, you know, requires, pursuant to legislation, a lot of expense and time and effort by council officers as well as expense to the community members. And if it's only 50 a year that are dissuaded, then I'm just wondering whether this is worth the effort. And I also wonder whether there is, in the submission put to us, any differentiation between the complex large ones and the mum and dad ones. I can't recall reading that one.
Yeah, that'll come through the eligibility criteria.
That's mentioned too, is it?
Yeah, that is mentioned too. We did have a look. We took a random sample of about, I think it was about 30 applications that we did have pre-lodgements on, and then applied the criteria, the rough ones that we've got at the moment. And I think we roughly halved the amount that we would consider warranting a pre-lodgement based on those criteria at the moment. So that would be outside of the scope of the 550. That's just the eligibility criteria. But even so, you can get people potentially that will cut the cloth of what they're talking about to come and talk to you if you don't have the 550 fee there with it. So let me put it this way. If I want to talk about X, I might throw a bit of Y in there because Y meets the criteria and therefore I get my formal meeting, even though X is the only thing I really want to talk about. But if you've got 550 application fee, that could be credited against you progressing it. You then got another criteria that sort of says, well, we'll have a conversation with about X anyway, but you don't have to pretend you're doing Y. And they'll be done through either those phone calls, emails, or even informal meetings with people, depending on the circumstance.
Just one final one. You mentioned it could be credited a couple of times, or may be credited. Is there some discretion there, or is it will be accredited if you go ahead with it?
Well, we put timeframes attached to it,
Apart from the
and
timeframe.
that is the 12-month thing.
So that's the only condition?
That's the only one. The question would be potentially going and just thinking through scenarios. You come in and talk about something minor here, you have a pre-lodgement, and then you come back within 12 months and it's changed absolutely substantially compared to what you talked about, then there's going to be a question about whether what we talked about here really applies to what you actually decide to go ahead with. And that'll be a matter of discretion. We'll make that call when we see what's in front of us.
Thanks, Matt.
Councillor Carl.
Thanks, Chair. Further to Councillor James's question about community service, if I'm processing this right, and the response you've given, Matt, I'd like to be confident as a councillor that we are offering ample opportunity for the mum and dad developer. Now, let me define that a little bit more. A more complex development, a material change of use by a mum and dad developer comes, you've got your eligibility criteria. I'm wondering if I'd like to be confident that we are capturing or giving ample opportunity for these people to seek some level of advice. And whether that we call that a pre-lodgement or it's an informal pre-lodgement, no bells and whistles, without prejudice, no minutes, that sort of thing. And the reason why I'm asking this is because I frequently field calls around development, people seeking technical advice from me, and it's no good asking me. So my response has been in the past, and it's tempered with some feedback that I've received, is be sure you book a pre-lodgement meeting or at least have a discussion with some technical people in planning to give you some advice. My very next line is they've progressed somewhat and found themselves somewhat entrapped in a consultancy gold plating solutions for them, and I wonder whether council, and I agree with Councillor Shine, I wonder if council doesn't have some role given that we're the regulatory authority, in actually making sure we give a level of advice that ensures people we're not prematurely corralling them down the path of a consultancy first up, because we're better off sorting, as Councillor Shine said, the chaff from the wheat. It saves a lot of angst and energy for all parties involved if it's really not a serious inquiry. It could be an MCU inquiry, but it may not actually come to pass. So I'm just wondering, if we get away from a free pre-lodgement, and I'm suggesting maybe we move to an informal process where it is without prejudice, no minutes, I don't know.
We have a series of ways generally that stuff comes in. We get, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, and just one more thing. And any subsequent meetings, absolutely, a fee applies. So yep. First touch with council, free, but it hasn't got all the bells and whistles and commitment from council officers because of a resource issue. Second touch, absolutely, a fee, a full-blown pre-lodgement. I just wonder that workloads can crowd in and phone calls aren't made or emails aren't responded to. I just want to be confident that people have the opportunity to seek this advice from council without... It may be a concept in their mind and it may come to fruition, which leaves a really good legacy for the community, but it's all on that front-end communication.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There are multiple ways that people engage with us with regards to this sort of inquiry. I will say too that I would suggest, from talking about some other councils, Toowoomba's Regional Council has very open with regards to communications and discussions with its customers and its ratepayers with regards to town planning matters. If you get to places like Ipswich or Brisbane City, you just don't get near them. It just doesn't happen. Whereas here we have like an escalation process essentially. One of our key sort of portals for people coming in will be contacting the technical advice officers, and they have a very sound base knowledge of the planning scheme, and they'll be able to give that basic sort of advice to the customers that come in. They then will triage depending on what comes in, and we have a roster of planners that back up the TAOs, that if they triage what comes in, if they don't think they've got the experience or capability, or it might need a bit more work on it, they then refer that to the backup planner, as we call it, on that day, for them to get in touch with the person, preferably pass them over straight away, but depending on whether they're available at that very moment, it'll go into a customer request, and then they will talk to the customer from that point of view. It then depends on the advancement and complexity of that idea or proposal they're talking about, whether it evolves into a pre-lodgement process, or there might even just be an email exchange to clarify certain things. That's one major conduit for that sort of inquiry to come in. The next one is through the website. We will people doing info@ or development@ emails, and they generally are put into customer requests, and they'll either go to the TAOs depending on the level of inquiry being involved, or if it's more complex and might relate to other things, that goes to the planners to deal with from that perspective. So you've got those sort of avenues. And then if you've got ongoing development applications, then there'll often be more direct communication between the planners and the customers on that space. There is a very wide and open communication base there between our customers and our planners. And with those customer requests, they have email follow-ups that if responses, if they're not actioned off within a certain period of times, they will be reminded, and their supervisor reminded. So there's all those sort of actions in place.
And councillors, the report today just deals with the proposed introduction of a fee. The reason we're saying we'd like to commence around the 31st of January is, and I guess, Matt's just gone through a whole range of different ways that whether it's the community or the industry can communicate with us for development advice. But I think what we've recognised through our review is that we need something clear. We need something that consolidates, that gives clear advice as to these are all the different sorts of ways that you can interact and have discussions with council. So part of this whole process will be for us to, be creating information sheets, we'll be creating guides, and part of the process will be to create something that clearly outlines all of the types of interactions that anyone can have with council if they're seeking development information, and that's something that we actually don't have in a clear, consolidated manner at the moment. So I guess this is broader. It's about making it clearer to our customers how they can communicate to us and what we have to offer. It's certainly the intent that there will be, as we already have, numerous ability for people to have informal conversations and discussions with us. But it's got to the stage in a resourcing sense that we need to really look at when do we hit the formal minuted pre-lodgement process, and we need to set some criteria around that. But that does not take away from the fact that on a daily basis we are constantly having communications, discussions, informal meetings with whether it's members of the community who are inexperienced developers, right up to consultants who are more experienced. So there is no intent, I guess, to reduce the level of service that we have, just to tailor when we provide, I guess, the gold-plated service, and I guess the internal audit and our own investigations in terms of how that process is working and the resource intensity that it has have indicated that we need to make some changes, and we want to make it a positive change. And I guess that's part of the process. So over the next 3 months, we will put some of that information together, we will communicate with the industry, we will put it onto our website, we will obviously educate our staff such that towards the end of January we will be ready to hit go in terms of, I guess, the new processes and hopefully have a much clearer message and communication to our customers as to how we can assist them and how they can interact with us, and that's the aim.
I'll just get the General Manager to make a comment there.
Yeah, just a quick advertisement for our TAOs, or Technical Advice Officers. They actually receive hundreds of calls a week, not just in terms of land use planning as really what we're talking about here, but they also receive calls in regard to building regulations, in regard to the Plumbing Act, in regard to engineering issues, and a whole range of other issues. So they are there as that service, preliminary frontline service level at the customer service office in Little Street to help particularly the mums and dads, but the consultants are often in there as well, getting advice from the TAOs as well. So that's a critical part. It's a part that is largely unseen, and they provide a very, very good service.
They do an excellent job.
Councillor Carl, you just had a
Yeah, just
follow-up?
finally, look, thank you, Danielle, Matthew, for that outline of what we do. So I raised that because it's important. It is important for us to know. And I think the other key ingredient around the promotion, I'm glad you said that we promote the avenues, because as far as a change in the way we do things, we need to promote that and communicate it. And one of the only final comment I'd make is, could we please disseminate that to our community development officers throughout the region, and even give them some initial induction about that? That helps broaden the message as well, because they're interfacing with real human beings every day. So, thanks. I'm quite comfortable with that on the basis of the explanations.
Thanks, Councillor Carl. Councillor Summerfield?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Matt. I can't help but think that if we'd been able to workshop this, we would have been able to flesh out all the issues and concerns that councillors have. And to me, I think the solution that's been provided here today, it impacts the poor and doesn't worry the rich, which isn't really the focus that I think that we should be actually having. And the fee doesn't provide efficiencies. It doesn't change your workload. There was mention there about tyre kickers. Well, I think tyre kickers could quite possibly be people who are unsure whether the asset that they have is developable or not, and if it is, what process they can follow. So to me, what we've done here is captured the more naive. I put myself in that category. If I wanted to develop something, I really wouldn't know, and I would want to come. And I encourage people to come and do the pre-lodgement, because it's beneficial not just to them, but also to council, because we get a quicker process when they know exactly what they need to provide to do the development. So I'm not sure that we've actually come up with the best solution here for what you're trying to achieve, whether it be via the preferences from the audit committee or whether it be for preferences for efficiencies within the department. I'm not sure that this is necessarily the best solution. I'm just a bit worried that the solution hasn't really identified the main issues, which is what we were just talking about, the fact that people, the poorer people, are going to be the ones that are going to be hit by this, whereas the richer ones, it's not going to worry too much, because they make plenty of money out of their developments generally, not always, but generally. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the date set for the introduction of this. Should it be approved today or next Tuesday? Why the 31st of January next year? Was consultation had with the Finance Department around the budget and whether we were better off introducing it on the 1st of January or the 1st of July? Why the 31st of January? I found that rather odd. But my main focus really is we're impacting the poor.
Did you want to make a comment about that, Matt, or you felt you've covered the
I
territory?
guess all I can say is that it will be credited against any application that's lodged subsequent to inquiry. When I talk about tyre kickers, I guess I talk about where we have instances where you have someone will come in 3 different times with 3 different people they're trying to sell the property to and have pre-lodgements on exactly the same thing. The other ones where we'll have a pre-lodgement and we'll provide advice for improvement, because it's all about trying to get better development outcomes and have an application lodged the same day as you have the pre-lodgement. So the question about the reasoning and reasonableness of having that. There's some instances that we've come across in the past with regards to, and that's what I mean by tyre kickers. That's sort of not legitimately trying to get a benefit out of that process, because the process is to improve the applications we get and improve the outcomes and improve the timeframes of those applications in the longer term.
Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Matt. We're talking about that there's a impost to council of time with these pre-lodgement meetings, and the remedy that's been put forward to us today is to attach a fee to that time. And my question through you, Madam Chair, to the General Manager, if we look at the numbers for 1920 financial year and apply this 550 amount, by my maths it comes to somewhere in the order of $81,000 as a minimum council would be earning from this. So my question is, how would that money be used within the department to increase staffing resources? Because just attaching a dollar amount doesn't produce more time for the council officers.
Oh, I love that question.
I'm glad, Stuart.
So thank you very much for the question. The fees, like all fees, go into consolidated revenue. So it's a TRC fee, not a planning fee in that sense. It's money that goes into the coffers for councillors to distribute in any way that they feel free, I guess, in that sense. If councillors wish to increase the resources in a department on the basis of the additional fees they're collecting, that's one way of doing it. However, that's an encouragement to the bureaucrats, if I can put it that way, to probably seek greater fees. So it's better to base it on the level of service being provided, the level of service that the councils expect the organisation to provide, whether there's a fee attached to it or not. And there are many, many services we provide that are not fee producing in terms of the specific service being provided. For example, we have a building certification service. Now there's a standard, there's a fee for that, but it's exactly the same fee charged by any other private certifier out there. But our guys, and I think a number of the private certifiers as well, have a policy of the initial, this is the building certifiers I'm talking about, the initial consultation being free, and certainly council's building certification unit will continue that service. So, and I'm imagining, you know, we often don't know whether someone is poor or rich, to be honest, when they come to council with an application, and it's not a criteria that's written on the application form either. But it's really important that people feel they are getting a service, a good service, and they will generally be happy to pay a fee. We certainly never considered going down the track of Brisbane, but then Brisbane probably is a very different situation to us, where, you know, the scale of those fees is mind-blowing, and I'm sure it does sort chaff from the hay and would certainly victimise even some of the wealthier folk out there. But I guess the important thing is that we don't base our services basically on we certainly would base the services delivered on the resources we have, but not on the fees that are being charged, because often there's no strong relationship. To answer your question on that one.
Madam Chair, if I could just have a follow-up.
Sorry, hang on. Councillor Von Hoff, I'll just get Matthew to respond to that.
Just also on that revenue side of things, at the end of the day, if there is a follow-up application, we achieve no additional revenue. It's credited against the next application. That's so right. If it were purely based, every pre-lodgement we get follows through with an application within 12 months, then we would be receiving no additional revenue. So that would reduce the scope of that sort of conversation anyway.
That's right, Matt. It would bring it down on these numbers to roughly $40,000 a year.
But you mightn't get those applications now because they know that there's 500 and they know they're not going to follow through on all that. There's a small chance they will follow through.
So through you, Madam Chair, we have to, as a council, trust that officers are not just putting policies forward to generate fees. That would sell Toowoomba Regional Council massively short. So I don't have concerns about that, Stuart. I'm saying that I'm wondering then, given your answer, do you anticipate bringing forward in budget considerations an application for additional resources to do this work?
No, actually, I'll let... No. I was about to say, this is probably a question that I should refer to the manager because it's near and dear to her heart.
Please, thank you.
Councillors, to be honest, you never ask for resources before you know you need them. So the intent would be, the issue's been raised in relation to the service that's currently offered. We're attempting to address that and respond to that. The proposal would be that we would implement our new system. We would gain an understanding and gain some data and collect some data on, has it been beneficial in terms of resourcing? Has it created additional work, which is the opposite of what we're hoping it will create? So basically, the intent is that we introduce the new system. The intent is that that will reduce resource time required to continue to, offer the pre-lodgement service and free up resources to do other things. As I said, the intent would be we would collect data. I'm hoping that indicates that that's the outcome, such that there is, in fact, and that's the whole point, that we don't have to come to council and say, please give us some additional resources, to cater for this service. The whole point of reviewing and implementing a revised and new process is that we hope that it will free up existing resources such that we can focus on other things like, assessing development applications and improving our timeframes around decision making. So, no, we're not doing this with an intent to come back in, 3 months, the next budget and ask for more resources for this process that we're proposing to introduce. It's quite the opposite.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks, Stuart.
Can I just follow up on Councillor Summerfield's question? Do we get an answer to the reason why it was coming in January 2022?
Part of the reason, as I indicated earlier, is to provide us with sufficient time to ensure that we can communicate clearly with the industry, with our staff, and be prepared for the new process. As I indicated, there's a number of things we would need to do around developing information, improving the resources that would be available, for example, on Council's website, and equipping the relevant staff with the information they need to clearly communicate, the changes that we're making to the process. The 31st of January is, a little arbitrary, but what we tend to find is that coming into Christmas, staff go on leave, and we tend to end up with, in the industry always, closes down over the Christmas period. And generally by the end of January, things are starting to pick up again in terms of the industry. People are back at work and, the inquiries start and the workload starts. So we've picked that as being a good time to implement a new process, fresh in the new year. Everyone's come back fresh to work. The work for the new financial, or calendar year, I should say, starts picking up, and we felt that that's an appropriate time to introduce this.
Is there any further questions for the officer? Oh, Councillor McDonald, beg your pardon.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Matthew. It seems that the complexity will arise by determining what goes to a pre-lodgement and what doesn't. And I just wonder, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, from an unintended consequence of those who would like to just keep referring to the technical officer, or as Stuart calls the TAO, in regard to information, rather than getting to a point of triggering a pre-lodgement for the sake of the $500. Is that an unintended consequence that has been considered?
It probably will be a consequence that we'll utilise those resources, but I guess that what we're trying to say is there's an opportunity for us to service more customers frequently and faster when we don't have to go through the full process of doing that pre-lodgement. We already have the TOs for that service they provide. They provide that, and if they do get more complex, that is in between what the TOs can provide and what could possibly go to a pre-lodgement, then the planning officers, those backup planners that I talked about, will have that conversation with the customers at that stage. So it's basically an escalating process more than anything else.
So I guess it's and Danny, I might comment on that, but this is one of those policies or decisions that council will make with a little bit of an unknown as to what that may be. Understanding the reasons why it's been put through from an internal audit, and understanding the issues that you've raised and how it may reduce the numbers of pre-lodgement, I'd be very interested to see what other impacts that may have, and that may be the conversation for a 6-month review of the policy, which I'd be happy to put in the recommendation. The other element is the first recommendation talks about a reintroduction. Have we actually had a pre-lodgement fee in the past?
We've had it listed but with no fee attached to it.
Okay, so perhaps it's just the introduction of a fee rather than a reintroduction.
As far as the review's concerned, yeah, and that's what Danielle's talking about. We're going to try and collect data out of this and see what happens. I'd suggest it probably has to be more going through to not this financial year but the one after that, and seeing what information we've gathered about what's happening with TAO inquiries, what's happening with customer requests coming through, what's happening with written responses, that sort of stuff. How many of these pre-lodgement meetings are we holding, and seeing whether it's had a positive effect and whether it's worked, whether it needs to be tweaked, or whether we have to, wipe down the chalkboard and start again. So I agree with you, there probably is a need for ongoing monitoring and looking at that, and we will be looking at data going forward with regards to it. I guess this fee will be reviewed like every other fee will come the financial year side of things.
So perhaps, just before Danielle jumps in, perhaps it's an opportunity for the General Manager in a monthly report to perhaps add that element of it, pre-lodgements, and what they are. That may be a way just for us to monitor as it's implemented. Sorry, Danielle, you want to say something?
Council, the other thing that we've done, and it gets complicated explaining it, as you know, each branch has a staff establishment, so we're allocated a certain number of resources that are budgeted for. Another thing that we've done, just to give us an extra bit of resourcing temporarily in the technical advice officer arena, is we've taken little bits and pieces of leftover, what we call FTE bits. We have staff that maybe go on maternity leave and come back part-time, but it's still a 1 FTE. So we've taken little bits and pieces from different resources that have been left over, and what we've done is actually created a temporary technical advice officer position and extended the time for that. So they will be basically in-house until probably March or April next year. So that will also give us a little bit of a buffer in terms of having that bit of an additional resource sitting there, just so that we can see what the impact of the changes are, and if that does create additional demand at the front counter, then we've got that resourced and we've got that covered until things settle. So we're doing what we can, I guess, to ensure that we continue to offer the best service to the customers that we can.
Madam Chair, thank you for that information, Danielle. And I just wonder if that change to the top one could be just introduced. Is this also then, maybe it's a comment through to Danielle again, or Matthew or Stuart for that matter, we get our monthly reports from the General Manager in regard to heritage advice, landscape advice, and it's often commented on how well used they are. from a perspective of a developer or wherever it may be. Do you see that that may also be something that we should, as a council, be mindful of as a fee for service?
Sorry, councillor, is what you're indicating is that you'd like there to be some information in the group report regarding what's coming through, or another option may be the executive assistant to the GM, as councillors know, sends out a monthly report to councillors which has a whole range of information of current applications, where their status is. We could also actually, if that's the desire of councillors, add to that an additional table which basically provides information on the types of pre-lodgement requests and meetings that have been conducted for the month. I don't know.
I don't want to overcomplicate things, Danielle. I guess through you, Madam Chair, it was really just an observation that this has come to the table because of the increase in pre-lodgements, and that we've seen an increase in, as we should, and we were encouraging it, for heritage advice and landscape advice. So the question was, at the moment, that's a free service the council provides. In your opinion, is that something that officers may look at from a cost recovery service model down the track?
No, yes, we could. Sorry.
Oh, we could, but I don't think we will in terms of the landscape and heritage advice, because it's very much there to promote, and it's been very, very successful, I would dare say, in terms of being there to provide advice to literally the mums and dads who own the character houses out there in the character areas of our city, who can come and get that advice as to how they go about painting, or not so much painting, sorry, that's a mistake, but certainly renovating their dwellings, what they can do, what they could do, what they should do, and what probably they shouldn't be doing. And that's very important. And I would not be recommending to council that we put a fee on that one at all, because it's been very successful, and it is distinctly aimed at the non-developers and at the mums and dads who have got the character houses. Yep.
And particularly with the heritage advice, it's been really good, because as part of the fast track service that we offer, if a proponent has been and discussed a proposal with our heritage advisor and he has endorsed, what they're proposing, then that will make them, and they provide that feedback when they lodge an application, that will allow a fast track process for assessment. So that has been working particularly well and has been a real benefit probably to the planning team as well in assessing applications.
Yep. I guess, Madam Chair, the reason I raise that is to emphasise the fact that this council does provide services that are free to the public to use, and it has been taken, it has been used. So that's where I see this as a completely different element which triggers an application to a level of pre-lodgement, whereby we're seeing the services that still run, and you explained it earlier, Matthew, the services that we provide. So I'd like to somehow have the review process put in that recommendation, whether it's a 12-month review of the policy.
Did you want to add another dot point there, Councillor?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that, actually. That'd be good, if we could.
That the policy... Oh, we've got it there already.
Could you make it 12 months? Because 6 months really is...
12 months is fine, yeah. Thanks.
And I think I get across my desk once a month a report from the technical advice officers as to how many applications they've... how many people they've spoken to over the counter and what advice they've given and in what categories of advice they've given. And I mean, I find that informative, but I haven't included it in my report. Would that be a useful summary if I was to summarise that right down and include that as well in my monthly report?
I'd certainly find it useful. It'd be, I think it's not too onerous a task.
Well, it's not no, it's not an onerous task at all.
You won't be doing it. You'll be delegating to someone else. Good on you. Thanks, General Manager. Lovely. Thanks.
That it may just fill in that little gap, but it's an amazing number of people that our technical advice officers talk to every day, every week, every month of the year.
All right. So with that, can I have someone move the recommendation That is there before you. I won't read it out. Councillor Carl, Councillor Melissa Taylor. Anyone want to go into debate? Councillor Von Hoff.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll be speaking against it.
So can I have someone speak? Councillor Carl for the motion.
Thanks, Chair. Look, on the basis of the explanations given by the officers around the rationale behind it, in remembering the question, to ask ourselves the questions, why are we here and what are the desired outcomes? And that is improved planning outcomes, improved opportunity realised on the ground, and based on the officers' deliberations and consideration reflecting on how we will implement this in the time, and the explanations given by the manager, Danielle, around the promotion and communication of how existing services will stay in place, and how the Officer Matthew has alluded to the process of prioritisation, or was it, what was it, Matthew? Escalation. And all of those existing services provided, I'm happy to support this recommendation going forward.
Someone speaking against? Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. While I appreciate a lot of what's been said today, I don't believe what's before us actually addresses the problem that council officers have talked about today. We've heard that the money raised from this exercise will go into consolidated revenue, so it's not going to create resources on the ground for officers to actually have more time to process these pre-lodgement meetings. And we know, all of us very acutely, that we have a housing shortage in the Toowoomba region at the moment. We're not unique in that. It's being felt across the regions in Australia, but it is the reality that the Toowoomba region has a housing shortage currently, and I'm concerned that if this is approved, over that 12-month period, which is a critical period for the development industry currently, it's going to affect those smaller developers, who we've referred to today as the mum and dad developers, and they are really important in attempting to turn over housing to address the housing shortage at the moment. So I think that I recognise that there's an issue with the amount of time that these pre-lodgement meetings take. I just don't see that what we've got before us is actually going to be an elegant way and an efficient way of addressing the issue.
I have another speaker for the motion. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, the motion, there's been a lot of discussion about this actually, which has been really fruitful. Look, I actually don't think this recommendation is designed to actually stifle any level of development at all. And in fact, the smaller level of development that Councillor Von Hoff mentions may actually be encouraged and streamlined, because there'll be less people, less of those will need to go to pre-lodgement. They'll actually go through the normal process, which was the issue I was raising around unintended consequences. I actually think we should be encouraging the TAOs and those officers that can actually run the process that is in place without pre-lodgement. So there is a process in place. It seems from the reports we've been getting, or the report, that we're seeing an increased numbers of pre-lodgements that in some cases are either unnecessary or don't go through. So to me, this is about redirecting those 60% or so that aren't going through into the process where they need to be without a fee, and get them done quickly. So I actually think this is a positive approach to actually expediting those smaller developments, the ones that will help with this, the shortage of housing. So I actually think it'll work in the opposite way. That's why I'm happy to support it, but certainly with those couple of additions, and very keen to see the unintended consequences and the positive side of those, and perhaps the negative, but I think there'll be more upside than negative, but let's see what happens in 12 months.
Can I have another speaker against? Councillor O'Shea.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And like a lot of speakers have said this morning, I obviously appreciate the the process that we're going through and the intent that we're trying to achieve here. But I have similar concerns to what Councillor Von Hoff raised. I'm just unsure as to how the addition of an actual fee helps us get to the solution that we're after. Totally agree around the concept of setting the certain criteria and how that all works, and I agree. I think that's something that can certainly be looked at. But I'll go back to what I said earlier, and I think about this, and is a pre-lodgement meeting that we're offering to our community, is it a business or is it a service that we're providing? And I think it's something that's a service that we are providing, which creates a better opportunity for our community. So that's the reason I'm against the introduction of that fee. I think there's more work that we could do around it. Does it require more resources, or what does it require on the ground that then creates a better service for our community? And that's the reasons why I speak against this motion.
Another speaker for the motion? Okay. With that, we'll put the recommend...
Can I sum up, Madam
Oh, I
Chair?
beg your pardon.
Thanks, Chair. Look, there's a couple of issues mentioned in the debate that are much bigger than this issue. One was around consolidated revenue. I think we need to go back, if we want to change things there, and look at how a consolidated revenue works, and the accounting framework that local government works under. I don't think there's much discretion there. Solution / amendment to processes, as the officer Danielle quite ably articulated to us, that, and the general manager, that revenue is not directly related to the services we're provided or we provide, and there are ample opportunities or ample examples of those across the business of council, the entire business of council. So I concur with Councillor Jeff that early identification of these opportunities and to help best direct will actually potentially free up officers' time to really focus on, I go back to my initial statement, what are we here for, and what is the desired outcome, what's the purpose, and that is improved planning outcomes on the ground for our community. But we have the opportunity to capture more efficiently and direct those to the appropriate streams within the organisation. So that's the reason I supported and moved the officer's recommendation, and with the quite sensible addition, Councillor Jeff's, around the measurement of the results and how efficiently or otherwise in a 12-month period, which is a fair and reasonable period to assess this. And we shouldn't make any change to our processes without being able to measure that, because that informs future effective implementation of any process. So thank you.
Okay. So we have a mover, we have a seconder. All those in favour of the recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the motion is lost. Are we up for a morning tea break? Oh, you're right.
You get the vote.
Well, I'm in favour. Yeah. Carol will be back next week. Carrie's carried. Thank you. Now, we're having a morning tea break, 10 minutes. Resume at 10:46. Resume the meeting, and we are at item 5, which is the exchange of council and private land. Now we have a senior engineer, Michael Evans, who's presenting to council for the very first time. So we'll give you a very warm welcome, Michael. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Oh yes, Councillor Carl.
Just not sure, I may have to declare a conflict here based on involved parties. The Avenues of Highfields, which from one of the proponents or owners of that part of that group quite a number of years ago, I received an election donation, or two. It was in the first and second term of this amalgamated council. So I'm not sure whether there was a time limit come in on those donations or not, but I'm happy to open for questions from councillors, happy to step out if they feel I need to.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And Councillor Bill, the way I read the changes to the Local Government Act was anything pre-2016 has now been basically voided. It's not on your declaration of interests or anything like that, and it's therefore no longer a conflict of interest.
Yeah, so 2000 and what was the first?
2008.
2008.
And then 2012.
Yeah, right. So that would be expired then. Yeah.
That indeed. Mr. CEO, did you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, there was a declaration to date, and if you're outside that period, you should be okay. You wouldn't have a conflict or a prescribed conflict in relation to that.
Well, my recollection, it was the first and second terms of this amalgamated council.
Is there any other questions for Councillor Carl?
Question, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Carl. Councillor Bill, given that's the case and understanding the rulings, is there any other level of conflict that you see or will impede your decision judgment in this particular item?
No, I mean, I have absolutely no relationship with any of the owners of that consortium, and haven't done for an extended period. In actual fact, probably the second term of amalgamated council where some things came to head, and it was exactly, there was the relationship dissolved pretty much from that time, so I don't have any personal connection or anything to any of the owners of that consortium.
Well, if that's the case, through you, Madam Chair, to the CEO, is there any need at all for a declaration? No. And therefore it's really just information that's been passed on. Thanks.
Councillors happy with that? Okay. All right, Michael, bit of a false start for you. Ready to go. Thank you.
Right, so good morning, Madam Chair and councillors. So the report I brought before you today is largely administrative in such that the report has been prepared to handle the process of dealing with council land. In particular, the report has been prepared for the exchange of land between Toowoomba Regional Council and the Avenues of Highfields. As part of the Avenues Stage 1 subdivisional works, land for drainage purposes was handed to council, while land for future road reserve purposes was retained by the developer, with easements in favour of council being provided for the continuation of a drainage channel. If we could please refer to attachment 3. Right. So under the current land parcel layout, the areas outlined in red is existing council land that is for drainage purposes. The area outlined in green is land that is currently owned by the Avenues of Highfield. However, council does have an easement in our favour for drainage purposes within that green extent. So, as detailed design of subsequent stages has occurred, it has been identified that to facilitate a better development outcome, the previously defined road reserve will need to be relocated. So this is where, if we take a look at the proposed land parcel layout, as you can see, existing easement L has been relocated towards the right and is now defined as what will be defined as the lot 514. So as part of that, it's important to note as well, in the top right-hand corner of the existing easement L, a small portion of the truncation has been removed and it will be added as truncation to the existing easement K, which will now be known as easement AF. All right, so it is important to note that the proposed land exchange will be of equal area and all costs associated with this land exchange will be covered by the developer. If I could draw your attention to page 4 of the report, it is noted that for council to facilitate the exchange of land, certain sections of the local government regulations will apply. Sorry, the 2012 regulations. So council may resolve that an exception under section 236 of the Local Government Regulations 2012 applies in relation to disposal by exchange of land to an adjoining owner other than by tender or auction. So for clarity, it is recommended that, firstly, Council resolve that an exception under Section 236 of the Local Government Regulations is applied. And secondly, Council approve the exchange of land between Lot 902 and Lot 509 and provide landowners' consent for the reconfiguring a lot application outlined within the report. And thirdly, Council authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign all necessary documentation required to facilitate the exchange of land. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Shine?
I noticed that there's a reference to the land being exchanged being of equal area. There's no evidence as to, whether it's of equal value, but looking at what you referred to as in attachment 3, it would seem to be much of muchness, I would have thought, anyway. But is that more relevant, really, the value of the land being exchanged as opposed to the area in the normal course?
Okay, so through you, Madam Chair. So the land being exchanged equivalent is 317 square metres being replaced for another 317 square metres. I think an important thing to note is the land area that's defined as Lot 509 in the green is intended as future road dedication to council. It's just at this stage, until stage 9C and 9B, I believe, come along of the subdivision, it will remain as just an easement in favour of council.
Fair enough, but I don't want to labour at the point, but I take it stamp duty will be payable and that's part of the cost that the avenues will be paying as opposed to the council.
Yes, yeah, so the developer will pay for all costs associated with the exchange of the land.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, did you have a question, Councillor?
No, I'm just happy to move the recommendation. If it's,
have a seconder? Councillor O'Shea? Anyone want to debate? No. With that, all those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Well done, Michael. Thank you. We move to item 6, which is the Development Assessment Regional Development Statistics Report, and General Manager Stuart Summers is going to take us through it. Thank you, Stuart.
A formal good morning, councillors. Look, very quickly, I'll just take you through the main stats relating to subdivisions and housing. The lots sealed last month in July were 18 and 34 this month. Detached houses were around 100 last month and 91 this month, so a slight decline there. And multiple dwellings in July, we had a grand total of 4 units. In August, we had a donut, none. Combined value in building has dropped away in the last month from 63.3 million to around 46.1 million. There's a bit of a tail there, I guess, in terms of the approvals going forward. And look, I might leave it there and ask for any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Shine?
No, thanks, Chair. I think I might have asked this question last month, but bearing in mind those decreases, slight that might be, do you think that we're on a path back to normality bearing in mind the stimulus packages of 12 months ago, things might be waning now?
Yep, the pre-stimulus normal, yep. There's definitely a tail, it's tailing off. And also the supply chain issues and the builders' ability to take on the amount of work is still there. You only have to drive around our new estates to see where there are numerous houses sitting at the frame roof stage, which is, I think, an interesting point where the houses have come to obviously a period of stasis. And hopefully that will change over the coming months as both supplies come through the supply chain, and builders can get to complete the various projects that they have on their books. But at the moment, there's quite a number where grass is growing around the site.
So, General Manager, is it true to say that they may have got to that point because the stimulus money had to be paid if a development
at a certain stage,
got to a certain point, and that's why they may have stalled now?
I think that's why that particular stage seems to be a stage at which a number of dwellings have come to a halt around our city.
Any other questions, Mr Mayor?
Just an interesting figure I got told to me this morning from a person who sells a lot of land in this particular area. Last month his organisation sold 41 blocks. 26 of those were to people from interstate who plan to build a house in Toowoomba and relocate to Toowoomba next year. So far this month there's been 14 sold, 8 of whom are in that same category of people from interstate who plan to move to Toowoomba to live. So I guess we can get some, there'd be a fair bit of positive out of that, I would imagine. But they're the figures that he gave me this morning. I thought they would be of interest.
And he didn't make any comment on whether any of those would be available to the rental market at all?
No.
Quite the opposite.
In fact, most of the people are actually moving to Toowoomba.
Owner occupancy.
Out of having been here, having seen what's here, having seen the land and having a desire to shift from where they are now. And I suppose, in fairness, there would be a significant financial reason why they would do that, given the price of houses in the capital cities and elsewhere, and compare that with Toowoomba.
We talk a lot, don't we, about the affordability here. So, General Manager, you mentioned that there was 0 units built this or approved. Sorry?
Approved.
Yeah, approved. Okay. So, given, as Councillor Von Hoff mentioned before about the housing rental rates at the moment, do you think then it is now time for Council to be looking at how we maybe try and improve those numbers in whichever ways are available to us?
Yeah, we are receiving feedback from the industry on a number of fronts. That inevitably, of course, red tape's brought up, planning or whatever. The other issue is more related, I think, in many ways to the margin and again, a reflection of the interesting market that we do have in Toowoomba, where housing is still quite cheap. You can still buy a detached dwelling on a 500 or 600 square metre block for a very reasonable sum, and which means that if you're building units to a reasonably good standard, you're putting all the fittings and fixtures into those units, the price point is often at or above what you can buy a detached house on a single lot for. So it's an interesting conundrum for people, but there are certainly there's still units being built from previous approvals, and apparently they're selling those. And the last agent I spoke to, which was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, said that there's 50% of the units that are being built at the moment are being sold for investment, which mean rental, and the others are owner occupancy, generally people post 50 or 55 years in age. And I got that from one of the more successful real estate agents around town. Well, she thinks she is anyway.
So just going back to my question, do you think us as a council should be looking at how we improve the numbers or how we encourage developers to improve the medium density?
Oh, there are many levers to pull, and I know where you're leading me.
I'm not leading you anywhere. I just I think people would like to know.
And we're going to be coming back to council with that issue and with the sort of levers that we could pull. Obviously, council some years ago went for the 50% rebate on infrastructure charges. That sort of worked very well, And we still have approvals going back to that stage, but again, they were never built. I think it's a combination. Last time was pretty much basically just that lever that we pulled. And I think we need to be a lot more sophisticated next time around and pull a few more levers. We need to concentrate on design, location, the sort of market that the units are being aimed at, and a whole range of other issues. And also, not to forget, maybe trying to attempt some consolidation in some of the areas where units are being built, rather than having units built on single blocks, which we get a lot of in Toowoomba. Try and encourage developers to think about getting 2 or maybe 3 blocks, putting them together and getting a much better development from that.
To utilise the existing infrastructure that we have already.
Pardon?
To utilise the existing infrastructure that we have already.
In most of the areas we're talking about, that there is an abundance of infrastructure available. Yep. In the good old days, they did build roads and sewers and infrastructure with large capacity, particularly the roads.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to General Manager. On page 139 on board books, it talks about the new temporary incentive policy applications, and it's pleasing to see that there's 4 applications in there. The one that caught my attention was the address for the Burnside development, which I assume is the one that's on the corner of Bell Street and Neil Street. I assume that's it, but it's 8 to 10 Russell Street, so it must go in some sort of an L shape into Russell Street.
It does.
Does it?
Yeah, Is it an L shape? It's certainly in that location that you're talking of. I'm not sure of its shape. I don't recall it being L-shaped, but it may be.
No, well, if it's 8 to 10 Russell Street, it must be.
It would have to be, yeah.
It must be L-shaped. But
yeah.
I must say, it mightn't be bad just to double-check that address, I think, on that.
Okay.
But coming back to Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, the Chair's comments in regard to that, that's 24 units. And we've seen 2 developments coming through in Milne Street for more accommodation in the CBD. Only one last week and one probably a month or so ago. So I guess from a council perspective, are those developments causing any issues for planners to process? Is it going through the process and getting things activated in a normal fashion?
Well, we're dealing with developers there that have been very good in the way they go about working with council and providing the information, and I don't think we have had any major issues with either of those developments. And certainly the Burnoff development, that's been approved. I think the other one has too, hasn't it? Or maybe it's still being processed at the
Milne
moment.
Street, yes, the Chronicle Centre. Yeah.
But no,
There's
there's no issues, no particular issues with those, and it's great to see the intensification of development in those locations that are close to the CBD and all those services that are there.
So I guess just a follow-up, there may well be a couple more temporary incentive policy applications come next month.
It could well be.
Can you just remind me, if someone receives that incentive, is there a time frame that they need to deliver that product or that build?
It's 2 years. Yeah, I might have to take that on notice. Just can't. There is, but I'm not sure what it is. And but there's also a stage at which the development has to get to before they can actually get that, basically. But look, I'll come back to council with an answer to that.
I guess that would just give the community because you mentioned it before through you, Madam Chair, around some of the unit developments that were approved back in 2014-15 that haven't been processed.
That's right.
The idea of incentive should be not only to provide a motivation for people to do it, but actually to complete it.
Oh, that's right.
And that's probably an area, so we've tightened that up in this policy. My recollection is 2 years, but I could be wrong.
Yep, you could well be right. Just to add though, in that previous exercise, developers did have to get to a certain stage by a certain date, otherwise they didn't qualify for that 50% discount. Now, by not proceeding to develop the site meant that they didn't pay any infrastructure charges either way, either as a discount or whatever.
Councillor Shine?
Just bearing in mind the subject matter here being multiple dwelling units in town, irrespective of the incentive policy, is there a limitation on the number of stories, levels that are permitted in the CBD? And if not, why not?
There's a planned height in the city centre master plan, which is 12 stories in the core, and I think 8 stories on the periphery area of the CBD. I think the Burnoff building has actually got a credit of 2 additional stories, didn't it? Anyway, yes, there are, to answer your question, yes, there are planned heights, and I emphasise the word planned heights because it does depend on design and depends on what you call a story. But yes, 12 and 8.
If I might,
we don't have many people wanting to go to 12 or 8 for that matter, to this point in time.
I think that's good, but others might disagree because, you know, it's more economical to go up, I suppose. But I just wondering what Toowoomba's going to look like in 50 years' time. Is it going to be higgledy-piggledy with different heights all over the place, or will it be like some of the beautiful European cities which have the same basic level of height everywhere, and you have your modern buildings further away in a sort of a different space? Because otherwise it's going to look... I was the first tenant in the Heritage Building, and, you know, that was a bit odd there, but that sort of a building compared with the rest of the buildings in town. Now we've got the Eastern Well, and I take it the Eastern Well is next door to the 8 to 10 Russell Street. So there's a bit of a pocket there. You understand that you're keeping it all together, but within Russell, Margaret, Ruthven and Neil, but I don't think that's what your policy says. You can sort of build them anywhere at the moment, and I just wondering whether that's really desirable for the how Toowoomba will look in the future.
Yeah, it's about economics. It's about the size of the site. It's about location in the CBD. It's about the market. It's about many, many things. So, and we could talk all day about height. And there's major issues, planning issues being debated at the Gold Coast at the moment on how to control height, how to make height look and feel. Brisbane's the same. They're having their discussions and debates over building heights in certain locations within the CBD, and then in their various locations where they've identified for higher rise development around Brisbane. How to achieve that, how to achieve the right height in the right location at the right time with the right uses, the whole range of things. So it's not a simple matter of just specifying a height and builders will build to that. I mean, obviously Wagner's, when they built their recent development there in the main street, they had the opportunity to go to 12 stories. I went less than half that. So we're not going to reprimand them for not going to 12 stories, but we're also, in fact, we're very happy that they're redeveloping in the CBD, and maybe the next developer along will go to 8 stories or something like that, and the next one along will go to 12. It's very difficult for you to control that through a planning scheme, and I often say a planning scheme is like a piece of string. You can pull it along, but you can't push it. You can stop things from happening if you want through planning schemes very successfully, but you can't make things happen, unfortunately. So, and height is a classic one of those conundrums.
Could I just finally ask, bearing in mind your answer, and bearing in mind that our considerations for a new planning scheme that we're undergoing at the moment, could this be part of that consideration over the next year or so?
It's going to be considered as part of the further studies in the city centre master plan. That's where we're going to be looking at that. In terms of the CBD, but if you're talking outside CBD in terms of height, yes, it's going to be a topic along with density and location of medium density and higher density and that sort of stuff. Yeah, that general material relating to residential densities and character of residential areas. Yep.
From what you said, whether it's inside or outside the CBD, it will be looked at by either one of those.
Yep.
schemes.
But particularly the major buildings, the really high buildings, I imagine won't be going anywhere other than in and around the CBD. In the longer term, there may be some exceptions in one or two locations where it may be advantageous to have a high-rise residential tower, but there's not too many of those locations in Toowoomba.
Thank you.
Danielle, did you want to make a comment or?
Oops. Do you want to read that? Just to answer the previous question.
Sorry, councillors, there was the question around the CBD incentives policy, and the policy indicates that in order to receive an incentive, you've got to have what's known as a qualifying development confirmation notice, demonstrate a construction value excluding refurbishment or fit-out exceeding $3 million, demonstrate that construction works have substantially commenced by the date of the 2024 Queensland local government elections, and demonstrate that construction works will be completed within 2 years of being substantially commenced.
2 years.
Well done. Thank you.
Councillor McDonald's correct again.
Any further questions for the General Manager? Right, with that, can I have someone move that the report of the General Manager Planning and Development Group on the regional development statistics for August 2021 be noted by Council? Councillor Carl, Mr Mayor, all those in favour? It's carried. Can I have someone move that we have an adjournment to move into confidential? Mr Mayor and Councillor Von Hoff, all those in favour? It's carried.
Well, good morning everyone and welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the Toowoomba Regional Council. This meeting is open to the public and will be also live streamed, and I'd like to thank all of those who are in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone watching via social media channels. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, the Gayabal and the Jarawar peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. Going straight to apologies, there's no apologies this morning, but there is a leave of absence that requires noting, Councillor Carol Taylor. And there will be no declarations as there is nothing to bring to the meeting this morning. So thank you all. Have a great day. I will now pass to planning. That was the easiest chair I've ever done. Thanks, everyone. So over to planning. I'll take a curtsy for that one.
That's good.
Okay to keep going? Yep. So I'll resume the planning and development meeting, and I need someone to move that we move into confidential. Councillor Melissa Taylor, Councillor Shine, all those in favour? It's carried. Any debate? We're all those in favour? Can't debate. Thank you. It's carried unanimously. Item number 9 is the Development Services Planning and Environment Court Appeals and Compensation Claims for September 2021. Can we someone move that? Councillor Carl, Councillor Melissa Taylor, all those in favour? It's carried. And item number 10 is the Regional Enforcement Actions for September 2021. Can I have someone move that? Councillor McMahon and Councillor Vonhoff, all those in favour? It's carried. Thank you, councillors. Close the Planning and Development Committee meeting.
Some lunch?
Well, there's only the...
It could take a little while.
It
Oh,
could be
water.
a longer
Yes, sorry,
one.
beg your pardon. Yeah.
Could take a little while.
Okay.
So it's 25 after now. Sure.
So adjourn at 1?
1 o'clock. Welcome to the Water and Waste Committee meeting of Toowoomba Regional Council for October. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to acknowledge usually the Mayor, but he's not here. Does anyone know where the Mayor is or if he's returning for this session? No? Okay. Okay. He's apparently going to be joining us for this session. Deputy Mayor McDonald, Portfolio Leader Councillor Summerfield, and the General Manager and the CEO. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarawar peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. There's one leave of absence that requires noting, and that's Councillor Carol Taylor. We only have one item to discuss today, councillors, and that's in confidential. The reasons are there before you. Can I have somebody move that we go into confidential, please? Councillor O'Hara Sullivan and Councillor Summerfield, all of those in favour? Carried. We're good. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, councillors, we're on. Got a thumbs up from Brendan there. Thanks very much, Jake. So, councillors, we've got the recommendation before us there. It's in 2 parts. That council award contract WT 10-2021 AMI smart meter implementation to the consortia-led Optus Networks Proprietary Limited, and 2, that Optus proceed with the proof of concept stage of the project with future information on outcomes and performance to be provided to Council to allow Council to consider proceeding to full implementation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Summerfield and a seconder, Councillor Carl. Anyone want to go into debate? That being the case, all those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. That brings an end to the committee meeting for October 2012. Thank you. And that's it for the day. Thanks. Thanks, Brendan.